First is Tom Van from Federal Highway. He will be talking on EDC4, a small change in your program, but let's welcome Tom up to the podium.
Okay, well, thank you everyone for allowing me to speak here today. I think a lot of what you heard today from Todd there, I'm going to try not to say the same things there, but first, I guess, the introduction for those of you who don't know me. I'm from Federal Highway. I've been there for 22 years now, and most of my work has been in D.C. Yeah, it's also known as the swamp in certain parts of there. Yeah, but I am a civil engineer, and I've been at this stuff for a little while. I work in the Office of Asset Management, Pavements, and Construction. My focus is mostly on asset management and a lot on the pavement side of that part of it too. So when we started with this conference, a lot of what was said initially was I was going to talk about rulemaking in here, and then I have to tell everybody that the rules were published actually in January with an effective date in February, and the new administration requested we push that back for a while to allow some review. And so there's still review going on, and I don't want to give you a date when it's going to be effective right now because I don't know. I mean, they could request another time for it too. So officially, we've been directed not to talk about this, at all. So anyway, when it does come out, eventually here, we will have a webinar that talks about a lot of it. We are going to have some training courses that we got planned and are starting to try to put together on that. So for now, we're funded through October, as Todd was telling you. So I guess we're still operational. So some of the things I can talk about a little bit is I wanted to get into some of the areas of preservation where we do have some programs on that. In our national program, we had to sit down and really look at where preservation was going on it and where we were today on it. And I think a lot of it, if you really sit down and think about it, the materials side of this is basically pretty good. The industry's done very well with producing a lot of quality materials. There's a few outliers here and there that are problematic, and in some jurisdictions, they do have some difficulty with getting all the choices that they need, And some of that's due to how often you can use it, and, contractors don't work for free, so, they're not there to lose money. So, there's some issues that have to be addressed with that. I think with the construction side of it, it's mostly good news. Agencies have had some adventures and some misadventures as they've taken on the preservation products over the years. There's a lot of interest now in doing construction specs. ISSA's done a lot of work, and I think there's a lot of interest in trying to get these into formats that states can actually use in their bidding processes and be able to make that happen. The basic construction practices are important. A lot of agencies are pretty good at this right now. Some of the local agencies are getting very interested, but they don't have all the expertise just yet on that. New technologies are coming out in some cases, not a lot of them, but there's a few out there. So there are some things that have to be adapted in that process. The project selection and practices. The commissioner talked about how in Maine you do have a lot of good practices here. It's kind of built into the whole program. And in other states, not so much. And that's exactly right. It's not so much. There's some very good work in some places and some areas where preservation is not really done too often in it. Been a lot of studies, a lot of guidance out there, a lot of tools have been developed there. For many agencies, performance is still pretty hard to predict. But I think the people are starting to appreciate the need to track the performance of this. And part of that is as you get into the selection tools, you need to know, well, how long is this going to last and what's this going to cost? How are we going to make this cost effective? The policies in the states on preservation are still pretty iffy in a lot of states. The dollars are even more iffy on it. So there are some areas that we can address. Okay, so in the current state of affairs, where's preservation headed, and where can Federal Highway make a difference? First of all, you have to know and love this mantra. It came out many, many years ago. Jim Sorensen used to say this all the time. Right treatment, the right road, the right time. Is that still effective today? What do you think? Of course, it's still right. You know. But the problem that we've run into is that usually we get the treatment right, and usually we can pick out the right road. But too often, when it's time to do that, we don't have the money. So, you know, the timing is not always optimal on doing these things. So if you start digging into that a little bit, as I've tried to do here, we find that the funding cycles that we're running into are pretty iffy. You know, you heard today, you know, that, well, we're funded now through October. Well, what can you do between now and October? You know, well, it's, yeah. So, I mean, this has been going on now for how many years? You know, so we do have a problem in that area. You know, sometimes the priorities are hard to predict. You know, we have different priorities. Different elected officials have different priorities that they try to set. You know, sometimes the actual pavements themselves give you some issues with it. You know, that nice little schedule of the deterioration rate of a roadway, that doesn't always happen, you know. But we are getting better. You know, we're appreciating the value of the data, and the more and the better data that we're getting with it. You know, and you always have construction, you always have weather that we have to deal with. So some of these programs that we're talking about, what we can do better, I think, is try to deal with some of these iffy parts of the programs. Try to address some of those areas where things do slip and get into trouble. Try to address the things that we'll be doing in a few years in the future. Some of the selection processes that are out there, NCHRP, TRB, and some others have worked on a lot of programs. They've improved a lot of processes. I've been on a number of panels that deal with preservation issues. Some of the things that are coming out are very impressive that we've seen in that. Some of the things in pavement management, you know, I was at TRB this year, and there was a presentation by a young man on doing pavement management using neural networks. I was sitting there thinking, you know, this would have been unthinkable, you know, years ago. Maybe it's still unthinkable. I don't know. I thought that was really kind of at the top end of what was going on here. And so, I mean, you know, getting down to where we can actually predict the performance is going to be one of our key things that we have to do in the near future. And why? Because performance analysis is what everybody talks about these days. You know, and what's the role of preservation in performance expectations and the targets? You know, we have to stop guessing on this. We have to actually know what we're going to get when we put these things down. And then at the last end of that is the economics of it. We've demonstrated that pretty well at the project level. You know, not every state has been able to pull that into the whole network of how their whole system is going to work. And if we invest so many dollars in preservation, how good is our program going to get? So it goes back to that same mantra again. You know, right treatment on the right road at the right time, every time. If we have that, what could Federal Highway do to help this happen? You know, you heard about some of the programs from Todd here. You know, there's a few things that had happened in recent years. Now, one of the things that we saw was that all the funding we're going to see in preservation is basically coming through our programs that we have. And you see some of them I've got listed up here. Yeah. It was clear a few years ago that we're not going to get any more discretionary money for funding from Federal Highway on that. You've got to work through the programs on it. There was a definite focus toward innovative practices. You heard some about that today too. The approach to preservation is following a lot of those innovative practices. Economics, we have struggled for years to get through that, and it's essential that we succeed at this point in time. You know, as I mentioned before, performance is a big item that we're talking about these days. Everybody wants to know, well, if I spend the money, what am I going to get? You know, how well is this going to help our system work? You know, so we're struggling to define that role of preservation when we look at performance. There, it's a big picture, a big dollar item, you know, really to look at in there. We're trying to work with our partners. That's why we're here, why we have this preservation partnership. This is very good. You know, we try to tie into the programs where possible. Research has been a big problem. It's not impossible to do research, but I can tell you that our research part of our agency took a tremendous hit on funding in these last bills. So there's not a whole lot of that you're going to see in Federal Highway taking on their own, but we are trying to do it through some of our pooled funds some of those activities that are going on there. So, so I think that's kind of where some of the programs are going. So here's some of the ones that I'm involved with for 2017. And you're going to see some of these that go into the next year or so, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about some of these on there. One of the first ones was the Sharp 2 R26 project. This project actually began back in 2013, and we had there what we called the Round 1 funding on it, and we had 14 states that were awarded some grants. Most of them all built their projects. Maine was one of those states that applied and built a project up here. Some used some very, very new technologies. Others used some traditional technologies. They just hadn't been able to get working in their state just yet. Now, we're still in the part of the process where we're trying to evaluate how well those things worked and try to draw together the conclusions for the performance part of that, and we're going to try to publish that. We're wrapping it up right now, but we really want to find out a lot about from these states on how well those selections worked. What lessons were learned. Looking for some updating advice on this stuff, updating information on economics, on performance. We still have a couple peer exchanges through that program that are going on through this year. There's also a decision support tool that we had developed as part of it. I have a demo that I'm going to do in a few minutes here that I can show you this, and we are going to have a webinar on it and feedback, and you'll be able to get a hold of this, very shortly on there. So we're going to do some publications, on what we found. We do have a data collection guide that's out right now. We do have some information on selection techniques. There is a promotional video that's available that you could use, and also some fact sheets on it. Just starting now is the second R26 program. And this program was basically going to work on some training elements of it. So we had several states that told us what they really needed was to have some training for their project supervisors, their inspectors. So that's being developed for some specific programs in 2 states right now. We're going to try to generalize that and make it available for the others. We're not going to replace the industry's how-to training, but we want to try to interface with that. So we do have a 3rd state that was involved, and we're trying to develop some program and project evaluation guidance for them. The expectation is that this is going to all happen in about the next 2 years. I have to tell you, though, there's been a really slow start on this one because we've had some problems with our contracting and all the things that nobody ever wants to talk about. So let's move to everyday counts. There is a preservation, when, where, and how. And there's actually 2 preservation projects. We have when and where, and we have a separate one on how. And when they came down and started talking about this, we were looking at it and saying, well, we got to find something really innovative about how to do this. And we're looking at preservation as being, what's really innovative here? We've been doing the right road treatment on the right road at the right time for years, so that's not particularly innovative, but are there some areas that are? So what our intent here is we wanted to look at it and say, how do you sustain this infrastructure through using this kind of a whole life investment that includes preservation? It's a key role in managing your pavements. It's a key role in doing these whole life programs that we're starting to hear a lot about. Or in other words, you might say, how do you integrate preservation into the regular agency pavement programs? Some states have done that. Commissioner said Maine had done some of that. Not every state has done that at this point in time. So the idea here was we wanted to look at this and look at the entire life of a pavement and say, okay, what's the plan for the preservation needs? So the time you're building this, you're saying, okay, well, somewhere out there, 10 years, 20 years out, you're going to be doing some kind of preservation on it. If it's asphalt, you might be doing some microsurfacing, you might be doing some thin lift overlays. There's something you're going to be doing. And you've already got some plans on how you've been doing that in your state. You know what works for you. The problem is that you don't always get it at the right time because it's not funded. It's not strategically looked at there. So this project, we're trying to look at that and saying, okay, what do you need to strategically plan this kind of stuff? Obviously, you got to track some data. You got to have some pretty good performance information. But I think it's possible to do that at this point. We still have some issues with performance metrics, and how do you really do this program integration on that? We're trying to address all those kinds of issues in here. We have a few states out there that actually came and talked at our EDC summits, where they talked a little bit about how they've done this stuff. And I mean, they're talking about, savings in their networks in the millions of dollars per year, by putting preservation in as a strategic time. That's just too important to overlook it at this point in time. So is it complicated? Sure, it's complicated, but there's ways to do it, I think. And there's some ways I think EDC can help on this. We're going to be looking at trying to synthesize together what kind of guides and selection tools are out there to help with this economic performance analysis. Primarily looking at how do you do this at the network level, Obviously, you're going to need some training down the roadway here, so we got that in the program, We got to look at some strategies here. We got to get into this integration process. We got to figure out how to get this kind of work into the STIP and some of the other documents that govern where the dollars actually go. And lastly, I think we have to have an authoritative guide on what metrics are needed to do the performance and the economics. So we also have some funding set aside in the EDC project to try to pilot these efforts in some states, develop some case studies and some lessons learned. So we will have some opportunities for some more states to get involved in this process. So that's kind of the plan right now. We do have a component in the guidance here. You heard him talk a little bit earlier about the sticks there. They do work with the local agencies. We got a lot of response from local agencies about how we need to be able to do this as well. We're not a big agency. We don't have a lot of money. We don't have a lot of dollars or resources. But if there's some way we can do preservation and know how and when and where to do this stuff right, it would be very helpful for them. So we're going to try to do part of this stuff in cooperation with the sticks and with the LTAP centers to try to get this stuff out. And I can tell you that the coordinator for that from the CAI office has been bugging me about this program for now a couple weeks. So I've got to really sit down with them and try to help work that part of it out. So now there is a second part of this program, and that was the pavement preservation how. Okay, and this one I'm going to talk about just very briefly because it's actually not my program, but it's something that I brought in here to do it. There's a lot of proven practices that are out there. I think all of you know that stuff or you wouldn't be here today. But a lot of the states, they'll restrict what they actually do to just a couple of the treatments. They won't use all the treatments. And there's a number of reasons for that, And I can kind of list through some of them here. There's a lot of uncertainty about they've never used this product before. We've never done it before. We don't know if this is going to work. Particularly if there's any risk for like on a high traffic volume road, you got risk on it. You're not going to want to take a risk with some kind of product you've never used. There's experiences that agencies have had where maybe they put it down, something went wrong, and as you know, if you fail once, it's really hard to get that treatment back again. In some states, they don't have contractors available to do things. I was out in the western state there, and I was looking at the guy's program, and he's got this huge chip seal program, and I'm saying, well, have you ever tried anything else out on these roadways? You ever do any microsurfacing or anything? Well, he says, the nearest microsurfacing guy is 900 miles away. We can't really do that. And so, we came back to that same case. Well, the contractor's not there because there's no work to do there because they've never done it, And so if he's that far away, they're not going to have the guy come in 900 miles to do the work. So maybe there's some way we can influence that effort and make that work better. I don't know. That's a real problem. One of the other things is there's a lot of confusion about performance history. Guys don't really know. I mean, most states have put down chip seals. They know what they'll do. But some new product out there, maybe they're not too familiar with that. Some of these new kinds of products that are out there, they don't have any history to support that kind of level of investment. And then lastly, I think there's a lot of misunderstandings. Some people just say, we really don't like the way that road looks, and so you have to do something with it, or what I hear about today, don't ever chip seal a bike path or something, okay, well, is that a misunderstanding? Well, maybe it is, I don't know. Yeah, but they want better treatments. Some people think that preserving a roadway makes them a second-class roadway instead of being what they really think they should be getting. So what they're going to try to do with this project is, here's some of the things they're going to try to address. Quality construction materials. A lot of this is going to have to be training and information for agencies, because I think the industry knows a lot of this stuff, but a lot of the agencies are still not up to speed on it. There's a lot of turnover with people, and they don't really know exactly all of what they're doing with these things. And then some of the activities that they have planned on doing it, do some peer-to-peer things in there, work on some updating those checklists. Some of you, how many of you remember the checklists? Those little booklets that we had? Okay, well, those are now actually available all online. And I think we're trying to get an app together on that so you can actually do it on your phone. And so, but some of them are pretty old. They could use a little bit of updating. They don't have all the new materials and the polymers and all the things that get used today that really make those products a lot better. So there's some of those activities that they're going to do, and try to develop some of the tools to make these things happen. So with that, I have one last thing here. There has been some interest indicated on reviving the old NHI course on preservation. I'm looking at doing that at some point in time, but I still don't have any money for it. Now, I wanted to do a little quick demonstration here of this Sharp 2 product that we had, which you'll be able to get a hold of at some point in time here soon, probably within the next few weeks. You might see this a little bit differently on your screen, but what this is this is a little very easy to run program that runs on Excel. And I think most everyone has Excel on their computers. And it's set up in, when you first start in it, it's going to have to, you're going to have to go through the thing about, macros can cause evil things to happen in your programs and all that kind of stuff. But once you get past that piece of it, then this thing runs actually pretty well in here. So it's designed so that you can look at, what kind of measures you're going to do. And it basically works on kind of, do you want to include these things or don't you? On it. So once you get it set up to do this, and this particular one is set up for flexible pavements, it also works on some for rigid and composite pavements as well, up here. So that kind of works. That kind of works pretty good. So then, as you go a little bit further down here, you can talk about what sort of treatments you can use, and it'll pop up here. It gives you some kind of an idea of some of the cost and the things that can be done on it. We had a couple little things set up here. I think I don't have one for Maine. I guess that's unfortunate, I guess. I should have done one for Maine on here. But anyway, if you do that, say for Kansas in here or whatever, we did set up a couple of them. If you're going to do this, you'd probably want to set up your own, because you know what your own costs are. You know what kind of performance you should be getting on these things. Find that out from your pavement management system. And so you can kind of do this, and not only can you kind of modify some of those things, you can actually add some other treatment types if you want to. So it's pretty flexible in that respect on it. So then you can get into that, and it has an analysis part. And once again, it starts asking you some questions in here. It gives you a little thing where you can talk about the section names, and you give it all the data that you have and the traffic and everything that you might have to deal with on it. And you just do a little bit of edit on here. You can change some of the things that are on there, okay? And then if you go into just keep hitting next here a couple times, it'll ask you what kind of treatments you want to consider for it, and same thing again, if you want to change some things, those things can be done on it. And then, did I go backwards? I went backwards. Let me hit the right button here. Okay. So we go forwards here again. And then it talks a little bit about what kind of analysis, So you can either do project and treatment, that's kind of a project level, or you can actually look at some of these treatment selections only where you have already designated the section. And this one, the first one might help you kind of bundle together the sections to make it work a little bit better. So you can kind of see in here a little bit about, some questions about, question answer kind of things. This way you can kind of standardize the way you kind of do these sort of things. And so we kind of think this might be a useful thing in here, in how it works. And then, get to the right button here. Try that one. And so, in here, it would recommend you do some preservation on that particular piece, and then it gets into a little bit more, talks a little bit about what sort of detailed conditions and performance to expect and what kind of sections are damaged and what sort of cracking and whatever you have in there, which then helps you try to decide exactly what kind of things you can do with that. And this gets to be really critical when you get on high traffic volume roads, because cracking and some of the other distresses can really be disastrous when you start doing something on a real high traffic volume road. You know, and you can get some very quick failures where you really don't want that. And so anyway, it gives you then some of the feasible alternatives that you have in here, and helps you narrow down what kind of things are in here. Okay, and then I think this was just a second set of those in here. You know, this gives you kind of some sort of a treatment performance piece that they're looking for on it. And so, you know, it will help you, it does help you kind of work on all that. So I don't want to get into too many details with that, because I'm not the guy that wrote this. There's an expert, we had an expert come in and do it. But one of the neat things about it too is it does help you figure the economics on it. So for example, on this particular project, you can see here's a couple alternatives they looked at, and you figure out what your equivalent cost per year of owning that roadway is. You know, and so that was kind of good. And then out of that, it'll help you make some kind of a recommendation of the selection of it, why it chooses one thing over the other, how it weights the factors that are involved in it, and you can change all those based on what your experience in your agency is. Yeah, and at the end, once you do all those economics, then it'll come up with some things that are in it with your overall weighting and the scoring, and then it'll come in and it says some recommendations that are in there for that. So, like I said, I don't want to do too much with this. You know, we're going to have a webinar on it from somebody who wrote this that actually knows all about the details of it. And this is going to be available within a couple weeks. And so I did kind of want to just give you a little heads up on that and make that available so you could see it. We designed it primarily for a high traffic volume roads, but pretty much could be adapted to work wherever. So, you had a question?
Webinar, or is that for the tool itself?
We're gonna try to make that available. I want to get the webinar and the tool dispersal, you know, kind of coordinated together. Because if you get the tool and you don't have the webinar, you might not be able to make it work and stuff. So we were talking within the next couple of weeks. I don't really want to give you a date just yet, you know, but stay tuned. We'll have it. We're not talking months. We're talking like weeks, you know, from having this to happen. So, okay. Well, thank you very much. Yeah.